The regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria has fallen. The dictator, whose family had ruled the country since 1970, fled. Experts say that the balance of power will change the complex region. Assad's defeat is a blow to Russia. Dmitry Bandarenka, the coordinator of the European Belarus civil campaign, said to Charter 97 media outlet that the fall of Damascus in 3 days showed the weakness of Russia. Russia is incredibly weak. Today it has no resources either for the war in Syria or for the operations in Africa or for the war in Ukraine. This needs to be understood. Putin just doesn't have the money. It turned out that the non-working sanctions were working. The friendship with the great Iran in this region. All Russia's strategic actions for decades simply collapsed, the expert added. According to him, on the other hand, we can say that the collapse of the USSR continues. In Libya too, the Gaddafi regime collapsed, and now the Assad regime has collapsed because Putin has no money, resources, military power. He's bluffing. He's incompetent as a manager. Russia could have had about $6 to $8 trillion of GDP today if it had not gotten involved in military conflicts, starting with Georgia, and had not pursued a policy of confrontation with the West. Now its GDP ranges from $1.5 to $2 trillion. Russia already barely survived, and now it has unleashed this war. We see her agony. The most important thing is a demographic catastrophe. For a lot of money, people from the hinterland are ready to fight, but this fatally undermines the Russian economy, Dmitry Bandarenka said. Just a few days ago, Lukashenko and Putin signed security guarantees in Minsk. The Belarusian leader asked the head of the Kremlin for the Oreshnik missiles, and all this against the backdrop of the fact that Russia refused to save Assad. The question arises, will Putin save Lukashenko? Dmitry Bandarenka says that now we are witnessing the beginning of the disintegration of Russia. The rudimentary tentacles remaining from the USSR are cut off. The rudimentary consciousness of generals and experts who think in terms of a superpower is erroneous, because Russia may cease to even be a regional power and all its energy will be directed at countering self-destruction. My acquaintances ask, and what do all these allied documents on security guarantees mean for Lukashenko? This is the hysteria of two dictators. They know the reality. After all, Russia probably also has money left for 3 days. Saber rattling and attempts to intimidate someone resemble one lizard who is actually small and at some point makes its mouth terrible and even becomes taller. Lukashenko is exactly such a lizard, only an old one, and even one who is not the youngest partner in his friends, who promises that, "I will protect you, Sasha." Assad has already been protected. Lukashenko will face the same. I am sure that in Belarus, the regime change will be similar in speed to the fall of Assad, but in a different way. He added.
UK's Foreign Secretary David Lammy called ousted Syrian President Bashar Assad the rat of Damascus in a statement to the House of Commons on Monday. Assad was a drug dealer funding his regime through Captagon and illicit finance. And we said no, because he was never, ever going to change. There were those who used to call Assad the Lion of Damascus. Now we see the reality. Assad is the rat of Damascus, fleeing to Moscow with his tail between his legs. How fitting he should end up there, he said in his address. Half a century of rule by the Assad family in Syria crumbled on Sunday after insurgents burst out of a rebel-held enclave and converged on the capital, Damascus, taking city after city in a matter of days. Opposition forces swept across the country and entered Damascus with little or no resistance as the Syrian army melted away. President Bashar Assad, Syria's ruler for 24 years succeeding his father, Hafez Assad, fled the country. Russian state media reported that he was in Moscow. Streams of refugees are crossing back into Syria from neighboring countries, hoping for a more peaceful future. The rebels face the daunting task of healing bitter divisions in a country still split among armed factions.
And some in this House asked whether we would re-engage with Assad. His Russian and Iranian allies have long championed him. Last year, he returned to the Arab League, and increasingly other governments were also starting to step up their presence in Damascus. And Deputy Speaker, this government chose not to re-engage. We said no, because Assad is a monster. We said no because Assad was a dictator whose sole interest was his wealth and his power. And we said no because Assad is a criminal who defied all laws and norms to use chemical weapons against the Syrian people. We said no because Assad is a butcher with the blood of countless innocents on his hands. And we said no because Assad was a drug dealer, funding his regime through Captagon and illicit finance. And we said no because he was never, ever going to change. There were those who used to call Assad the Lion of Damascus. Now we see the reality. Assad is the rat of Damascus, fleeing to Moscow with his tail between his legs. How fitting he should end up there. We see streets of Syrians cheering his demise, tearing down his statues, reuniting with loved ones who have been disappeared. We have long hoped to see him gone and welcome the opportunity this brings for the people of Syria. Assad's demise is not just a humiliation to him and his henchmen, it is a humiliation for Russia and Iran. This House will know that the group whose offensive first pushed back the regime, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS as it's now being called, are also a prescribed terrorist organisation in the UK as an alias of Al-Qaeda. That should rightly make us cautious. Thus far, HTS has offered reassurances to minorities in Aleppo, Hama and Damascus. They have also committed to cooperating with the international community over monitoring chemical weapons. We will judge ATS by their actions, monitoring closely how they and other parties to this conflict treat all civilians in areas they control. The UK and our allies have spent over a decade combating terrorism in Syria. Daesh remains one of the most significant terrorist threats to the UK, our allies and our interests overseas. We take seriously our duty as government to protect the public from this and other terrorist threats. The humanitarian situation in Syria is dire, with almost 17 million people in need. Millions are refugees, largely still in neighbouring Turkey, Lebanon and Jordan. Seeing so many start to return to Syria is a positive sign for their hopes for a better future now that Assad is gone. But a lot depends on what happens now. This flow into Syria could quickly become a flow back out and potentially increase the numbers using dangerous illegal migration routes to continental Europe and the United Kingdom. Syria has also proven a hotbed of extremism.